But if you are new with us, we have been we took a break for the last couple of weeks, but we have been in this book called Ruth, and it's a story. A large part, it's a story of three single people. All right, and so I tell you that up front because what we're talking about today really hones in on that, all right? That we've got three single people that we're talking about here. Half of the United States population are single people, and so, or at least half of the adults, half of the adults. So more than half of the population of America are single, and so here we have a book that is really about three single people, and so a large part of what we're talking about today is honing in on that, because that's just where it takes us in this crazy little chapter. Well, we're in this story that it's a great story. It begins with a guy by the name of Elimelech. He has a family. He's married to his wife Naomi. They have two boys, but a famine hits the land. They live in this in this little town called Bethlehem, and in Israel. And a famine hits Israel, and so Elimelech makes a really bad decision and decides to take his family and leave Israel and go to another country. And so he's leaving essentially. Effectively leaving the presence of God, the provision of God, the people of God, to go to this place called Moab, this country called Moab. It's a country that worshiped a god called Chemosh, a false god called Chemosh, and they were a country that mocked the God of Israel. In fact, they would try to entice the people of Israel to worship their God and get involved in all the things that were involved in worshiping Chemosh, like sexual immorality and all these immoral things. And so here's Elimelech going, well, I gotta make sure that my family can eat. And so he makes this terrible decision and takes them to Moab, and they settle into Moab and make a home there for 10 years. And during that 10 years, their two sons marry Moabite women who do not worship the God of Israel, who worship Chemosh. And then the very thing that they were trying to avoid, it happens. Elimelech dies, and then the two boys die. So here you have Naomi and her two daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, and they're in this country. Here's Naomi in this country where she does not belong. She does not worship their God. These are not her people. So she decides, hey, I'm going back home. And so she goes back, she makes her way toward home, and Ruth says, hey, I'm coming with you. And I'm not just coming with you just because I feel sorry for you. I'm coming with you because your God, the God of Israel, has now become my God. And so your people will now be my people. And so Orpah goes back to her own people, and Ruth goes with Naomi back to Bethlehem. Well, they arrive in Bethlehem in Israel, and the famine is over, but they arrive broken. And Naomi arrives bitter. In fact, she said, I know my name means sweet, but stop calling me Naomi because I'm not sweet. I'm bitter. Call me Mara. That's who I am. That's my life right now. And so she is, no offense, Mara, but she's going, this is my life. This is my life. And she believes that God's hand has come heavy against her. Well, Ruth is going, look, we gotta do something. We gotta figure out a way to live here. So she says, listen, Naomi, I'm going out to the field to see if I can find a field somewhere that somebody will let me glean in their field. And so she goes, and the first field she comes to just so happens to be a field that belongs to this guy named Boaz. And as it turns out, Boaz is a great guy. This is a time in the nation of Israel where it says that the people everybody just did what was right in their own eyes. They just decide whatever I think makes me happy in the moment, will give me pleasure in the moment, that's what I'm doing. And we know what the Bible says, we know what God says, we know God's law says, but we're just gonna do what we feel like is right in this moment right now to make me happy. That was what was happening in Israel. Well, and amongst that kind of thought in Israel and way of life in Israel, you have this man named Boaz who stands out from the rest because he's a guy that fears God. He's a guy that worships God. He's a man of strength. He's a man of character. He's a man of integrity. And Boaz hears about what Ruth has been doing, how she left her homeland and came with her mother-in-law and has been doing what she can to protect and provide for her mother-in-law. And so Boaz goes out of his way to provide for Ruth and says, look, you come here and I'll make sure you're taken care of. And so he introduces her to his employees and says, look, you don't need to go and glean from the edge of the fields like all those who are poor do. I'm going to treat you like one of mine. You come right into the middle of the field. You come into the middle, I'll give you the best that we have. I'll make sure that you have the best. And so he provides for her. And then he said, I'll tell you what, and you can just keep coming back until the harvest season is over. And so she does. And so and at one point there was a moment, and we saw this last time in chapter 2. There was a moment where they take this break, like a lunch break, and everybody's sitting together, and he invites Ruth over to the table with all of his employees, with his crew, and says, "Hey, eat with us." And he serves her food, which was just crazy, which was unheard of. She's a Moabite, and she's a woman, and so for in that culture, this was just a crazy statement that he was making. And but then harvest season is over, and they all go back home, and that's the end of chapter 2, and that's it. Boaz doesn't make a move. There's nothing happening there. It just ends this way. And she lived with her mother-in-law. That's it. And then we come to chapter 3. And it starts this way. It says, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you?" So there was a moment when she decided to leave Moab and go back home that her 2 daughters-in-law were with her, and she said, look, she stopped and says, look, you all need to go find rest. And she wasn't meaning you need to go find sleep somewhere. She was saying you need to find protection and provision in a husband, in a family. And so go find a husband. You don't need to come with me. And Ruth goes with her, and Orpah says, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And so this is what she's referring to. She's like, look, you need a husband. It's time for you. You need to have protection. You need to have provision. You need to come, you need to find you a husband. And so she's going, we need a plan. This is Naomi said, we need a plan for you to get a husband. And so so she lays it out. She's like, so here's the plan. And let me just say this real quick. While I admire Naomi's concern and care for Ruth, the plan that Naomi comes with is questionable at best, all right? It's questionable at best. I admire the fact that Naomi is going, look, I believe in the sovereignty of God, but that doesn't mean I'm just going to stall and just wait for a husband to show up for my daughter-in-law at the door. No, she's going, I believe in the sovereignty of God, and I believe that God works through the activity of his people. So let's go. Let's get something going. Let's get this plan. But the plan, it's not a great plan. All right, here we go. Verse 2, it says, so they're looking for a husband, right? We're looking for a husband. Is not Boaz our relative? Now, if you're new to the story, you're going, what? Like, that's not typically where we start with finding a spouse, right? It's like, who's in our family that's available? It's like, we don't do that, right? That doesn't translate well, but that's not what's going on here. It wasn't like, hey, isn't he like a first cousin? Should we? That's not what's happening here, all right? We'll figure this out later on. So he says, it's not Boaz, our relative, with whose young women you were, so you were out in the field with his women working the field. See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. So she knows where he's at. And here's just so you know what's happening here. Harvesting in the fields is over. It lasts about 6-7 weeks, and now it's over. And now it's time to get the grain from the wheat that they had harvested. And so what they would do is they would take all that they had harvested and they would take it to a place called the threshing floor. And a threshing floor was just a place where you would store your wheat, and then you'd take a pitchfork and you'd throw it up in the air, and then the wind would blow the chaff away, and the heavier grain would fall, and you would collect the grain. And so this was typically done somewhere in the hills where the wind would pick up, and they would do this in the evening typically, where like during the evening breeze. And so And also this was a communal place. This wasn't just like every farmer had their own threshing floor at their house or on their property. There was a common place where all the farmers from the village would come, and they would bring all of their wheat in, and then they would separate the grain from the chaff. And so this was a place where, as you can imagine, was a place of a lot of joy and celebration. because this was payday. Like, especially for these guys. I mean, it had been 10 years. They've been 10-year famine. And now here they've got something to show for all their work. And they've got a way to provide and we can provide for our family again and live and eat. And so this was a time of celebration, but also you gotta think that this is a place, a threshing floor would be a place where men are just like living it up. Like they are excited. They are. I mean, this is payday. They're hyped up on adrenaline. And typically, when you get a group of men together like that are hyped up on adrenaline and happy, bad decisions are made. All right. A lot of time, bad decisions are made in that environment, and certainly that would happen at the threshing floor. It was known for bad decisions, immorality, including prostitution. So here you have Naomi going, "Hey, I got an idea. Boaz is at the threshing floor. You ought to go in there. You ought to go to the threshing floor and make your move. So here's what you're going to do." And so here she lays it out. She says, "First, wash therefore and anoint yourself." So first things first, Ruth, take a shower. That's what she says. You got to get cleaned up. Now listen, there's a lot here. As I said, sketchy advice. Like I'm not recommending for anybody, and we'll get into that in a minute. But there is some wisdom here in what Naomi says. And for instance, if you are a single person in the room and you're praying for God to give you a spouse, getting cleaned up is always a good place to start, all right? It's always good advice, always good advice. I mean, think about it. The only time that Boaz had ever seen Ruth was out in the fields. It was the only time that he would see her. She was out in the fields and she was gleaning. She was gathering wheat and for her and Naomi. Like this was it. For the last 6-7 weeks, he saw he saw Ruth out there, and she's working the field. She's dirty, she's sweaty, she's stinky, she's got her hair all up in a bun. And Naomi says, "Look, hey, not this time. All right? Not this time. Like he needs to see you like presentable. Like this time it's got to be different. So go get yourself cleaned up, put on some ointment, like some perfume, and smell good." And then she says this. She says, "And put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor." Put on your cloak. In other words, wear something nice. Modern translation, maybe consider wearing something other than yoga pants. I don't know. I mean, I know they're comfortable. Not a great look, all right? Look, listen, I understand you wear that around the house. I wear stuff around the house that I wouldn't wear in front of you, okay? So just leave it at that. Look, listen, we talked about this a few times, a few months ago when we were walking through Corinthians, and we talked about how how Christians tend to fall into this idea that what really matters is not the physical, but it's the spiritual. You remember when we talked about that? Like we kind of pit one against the other. Like the physical doesn't really matter. It's the spiritual that really matters. And what I said then and what the Bible tells us is that's just not true. In fact, that's heretical to say that. To say that the physical it comes under like what is spiritual is what matters and physical doesn't really matter. That is heretical to say that. That God created us as physical and spiritual beings. The Bible has no problem pointing out the beauty in the physical, whether that be the beauty of creation or the beauty of a person. Now listen, we shouldn't worship physical beauty, and we certainly shouldn't find our identity or our confidence or our security in physical beauty, but we shouldn't neglect it either. So Naomi tells Ruth, "Hey, get all cleaned up. I want you to smell good. I want you to put on some clothes that are made for a human being. And I want you to get out and go to the threshing floor." Now, it is possible that what Naomi is speaking to here is that Ruth, since her husband had died, was wearing clothes to show that she had been in mourning, that she's in mourning. And so she's going, "Look, hey, it's time for you to get out of the drab clothes, all right? And it's time for mourning is over. It's time to move on." And so she goes on. She says, wash therefore and anoint yourself and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Don't make yourself known. Don't let it be known that you're there until he has finished eating and drinking. You know what she's saying? She's saying, look, give the guy some space, is what she's saying. Just give him some space. Like, don't go in with, Boaz, why haven't you called? Why haven't you texted? How come you haven't changed your Facebook profile to in a relationship? Like, what's going on? Like, I think we need to have the conversation, define the relationship. Like, I got to know, where are we at in this? Listen, if you are a single lady in the room, if you get advice like that, if you get advice from someone that says, hey, you need to go have a conversation. You need to go ask him why. Do you know who gives that kind of advice? Other single ladies. And I don't believe that that's an accident, all right? I don't think this. You need to get yourself some married friends to give you some advice. And this is Naomi. Naomi, she's been married. She gets it. And she's like, look, listen to me. Take it from me. I know it's been a while. I know he hasn't called. I know he hasn't come after you. I know he hasn't made a move. Give him some space. Like, don't show up and start asking questions. Just give him some space. Just wait until he's happy. Wait until he's happy. And you know when a man's happy, she says, you know when a man's happy? It's not too hard. Just after he's eaten and he's had a cold Coke Zero, all right? Just wait till he's good and, fed up, Just give him some space. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Now, can I just say, as a father of 3 girls, I don't like where this is going. I don't like this. This is some sketchy advice. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. Yeah, I bet he will. And she replied, all that you say, I will do. I don't know about you, but I'm looking at this. I'm reading this going, what kind of advice is this? This is insane. I mean, how many of you would tell your daughter that is looking for a man, like looking for a husband, say, okay, here's what you do, all right? You wait till he goes camping. And then at midnight, go into his tent, get into his sleeping bag, snuggle up to him, and whisper in his ear, tell me what to do. This is crazy. This is crazy. Wait, listen, but here's the thing. Here's what we got to know about this passage. In the Bible, we have 2 categories of passages. We have passages that are what's called prescriptive, and then we have passages in the Bible that are under the category of descriptive. Prescriptive passages are the passages in the Bible that says, hey, this is how you live your life. This is how you should live your life. This is how God intended to live your life. You take this as from God, you do this, live this out. That's prescriptive passages. And then there are descriptive passages that are not trying to tell you how to live your life, they're just telling you what happened. Like, this is just what happened. This passage right here fits into the descriptive passage. This is not 7 steps to getting a husband. This is just saying, hey, this is what happened. This is what Naomi said. This is what Ruth did. This is what happened. But one of the reasons that I love the Bible is that the Bible is just honest. Well, the Bible is just honest. It doesn't hide the messy stuff. It tells us things like David was an adulterer and he was a murderer, and yet he was a man who was after God's own heart. And that in his repentance, God used David to be the greatest king that Israel had ever known. And then here you have Naomi telling Ruth to do some questionable things. And spoiler alert, Ruth and Boaz do get married, and they do carry on the family line that brings Jesus into the world. Now listen, neither of these examples or the dozens of examples in the Bible are permission to be foolish. This is not like, hey, well, they did it, so must be okay. That's not what this is. But here's what it does. It does display to us the mercy and the patience and the grace of God when we've made a wreck of it. Now, to be clear, I certainly do not believe that Naomi was giving advice for Ruth to go in to Boaz and sin. I do not believe that that's what is happening here. It wasn't sinful advice that Naomi was giving, but it wasn't advice that I would put in the category of wisdom. Look, when you're looking for counsel, you should look for Christian counsel. Like you should look for Christian counsel. That should, as a follower of Jesus Christ, who believes in the authority of the Scripture, that our life is found here, then you should, when you're looking for counsel, you should look for Christian counsel. But not only Christian counsel, you need Christian counsel that is wise. It's not just going to your buddy who says that he's a Christian and go, I got Christian counsel. You go to Christian counsel that is wise. That is wise. Listen, we are flawed people and we get it wrong. We get it wrong. And so be sure that you're getting wise counsel, which means it would be wise to get counsel from more than one person. This is why, as Stephanie mentioned at the top, this is why being in an environment outside of this, where you're not sitting in rows, but you're sitting in a circle, where you're getting to, like in groups and D groups, where you're getting to know one another. There are people there that know you. There are people there that love you, that are following Jesus with you. So you have these people in your life that can give you counsel, multiple people in your life that can give you counsel, that they know that you're wanting to honor the Lord in this decision, and they want the same for you. And so when you get counsel, you got to get wise Christian counsel. It goes on. It says, so Ruth is going, well, all that you say I will do. And I don't know. This is just conjecture. This is just me thinking. But Ruth is new to this whole worshiping the God of Israel thing. From all we know, only thing she ever got about this God of Israel is from Ruth, or is from Naomi. And so she's going, hey, here's what you do. Here's how we do this here. And she's like, all right, I'll go down to the threshing floor. I get that's what we do. So she went down to the threshing floor, and she did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, now listen, eaten and drunk. He was not drunk. He just drank something, all right? Just want to make that clear. And his heart was merry. He went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. And they did that because, again, they're all staying in the same place. They're all at the same threshing floor, all the farmers. And so they didn't trust one another. I mean, they didn't know, and who knows who from the outside would come in and take their grain. And so they would sleep with their grain, at their grain. And then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. Anybody else uncomfortable? It said, at midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. So from what we can gather, Boaz is a guy that he's never been married. We don't have anything in the Scripture that tells us that he had a family, he had children, he had a wife. So as far as we can tell, he is a guy that's never been married, and he's an older man. When I say older, he's at least a few years older than Ruth. And so here's a guy he's had a good season. The famine is over. He's having a good day. It's payday. He's had a good meal. He's had something to drink. He's happy. And now all of a sudden, a woman is laying at his feet in the middle of the night. Do you know what kind of man would find this tempting? I'll tell you, a man that is breathing, all right? He wakes up and there is a woman at his feet, and he's startled. He's startled. And so it says, he's at midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. And he said, who are you? Which is a really good question, right? I mean, if you ever find yourself in bed and someone else that you don't know is in your bed, you wake up in the middle of the night, you should ask the question, who are you? That's a good question. And so he says, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. So Ruth goes off script here, which is actually not a bad thing, because instead of the whole, hey, tell me what to do, she says, hey, here's why I'm here. Here's why I'm in this moment right now. And she says, spread your wings, or it may say in your Bible, spread your garment over your servant. Understand, this is not Ruth being shady here. This was language that was used to talk about marriage. This wasn't Ruth looking for a one-night stand. This was Ruth looking for marriage. Boaz, he uses this language earlier on, if you remember, when he had prayed for Ruth. He had prayed for Ruth to find protection and provision under the wings of God. And now Ruth is going, Boaz, listen, I think that you may be the answer to the prayer that you prayed for me. I think God might be using you to be my provider, to be my protector. Cover me with your wings. So what's happening here is she's not so much proposing marriage to Boaz as much as she is saying, look, if you asked me to marry you, I wouldn't be opposed. I'll be all right with that. And then she reminds him, she says, you are my redeemer. You are a redeemer. So remember the culture in the law at that time, that it was that if a man had died and he had a wife and no children, then his brother was obligated to marry his wife. And in that way, the family line would be carried on. He would inherit all the property. The property would stay in the family, and he would be called what they called back then the kinsman redeemer. And so, but the thing is, Naomi does not have a brother-in-law that is alive. Her brother-in-law died. So there is no one who is obligated to take her as a redeemer. Boaz is not obligated. He is not a brother-in-law. He is not obligated to take Ruth as her redeemer. But Boaz he's under. I want you to understand that Boaz is under no obligation here. That this is not Ruth trapping Boaz, going, "Hey, you're a redeemer. You got to do this." No, they both understood there is no obligation here, and so this was a bold move for Ruth to go in and say, "Hey, if you would ask me to marry you, I'll do it. You're a redeemer." And his response here will literally change the course of history. Not just for their family, but for the world. His response will change the course of history. And he could respond harshly, accusing Ruth of acting like a prostitute, coming to the threshing floor and embarrassing him in front of all of these farmers, and who knows what word could get out about who's Boaz now, and publicly he could publicly shame her, or he could read what Ruth is doing. He's going, okay, I see what this is. And he could read it as a license to sin. Remember, this was a time when everyone just did what was right in their own eyes. I mean, twice already he had to tell his guys, keep your hands off of Ruth. Don't touch her. Because this is what was normal in that culture. It was just sexual abuse. This is what was normal. And so she faced the risk of abuse. And so what does he do? Verse 10, and he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich." What is he talking about? This last kindness and then the other kind, the first kindness. He's talking about the kindness that Ruth has shown to Naomi. The first kindness being that she left her home and she came and she's staying with Naomi to provide for her, try to get her protection. That was the first kindness. And then the second kindness is just what has happened. That he realizes that she doesn't have to go after a redeemer. She's not obligated. She could go after anybody. She could go after anybody she wanted to. She could marry anybody. She was free to marry anybody. But she has chosen to stay within the family. She has chosen to stay within, to carry on the family line. She has chosen to keep the property and all of that within the family. She didn't have to do this, but this is a kindness that she has shown to Naomi. And so now we know, as we look at it, like this is the point where we see, that we know why Boaz never made a move. Like to begin with, Boaz just thought, like, she's just way out of my league. Like, I'm an older man, she doesn't want anything to do with me. It's what he says. You could have gone after anybody. Like, my guys have had their eyes on you since day one. You could have gone after anybody younger. You could have gone after anybody richer. But you chose me. And so he says, and now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. A worthy woman. You are a worthy woman. This is a single woman. And she is already known all around town as someone from Moab. She is known as someone as a worthy woman. Proverbs 31 uses this phrase to describe a woman who is respected and praised by others because of how she lives her life in private and in public. Like, she is just a woman of integrity and character. It doesn't matter if she is in front of everyone or if she's in the dark alone. Out in public or behind closed doors, she is a woman. She is just known to be someone of character and integrity. She is a worthy woman. We were already told that Boaz was known as a worthy man, a man of integrity and strength and character. So this is shaping up to be a great match between Ruth and Boaz. But just when you thought that we were heading toward a happy ending, here we go. And so he says in verse 12, and now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. That if Ruth is to marry a redeemer, that there's actually somebody in the family who is a closer relative to her husband than he is. And so he would have first rights to be a redeemer. He would have first rights to marry her, to inherit the land, and all of the things that came along with it. And so Boaz is going, look, actually, there's someone closer than me, more qualified than me to be your redeemer. And so he says, remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. So I don't know if you're wondering or if you're asking the question. I certainly did as I was walking through this. Maybe some of you are asking, so what exactly happened here on this night? Like, what was going on here? Like, did they cross the line? They're certainly in a situation that they should not have been in due to Naomi's advice. So, did they cross the line? I mean, come on. Well, listen, when the Bible talks about sexual intimacy, it doesn't talk about what, but it talks about when. When the Bible talks about sexual intimacy, it talks about any kind of intimacy within a relationship. It doesn't do the thing that we tend to do. It doesn't like say, well, this kind of intimacy is good here, but then this kind of intimacy is good over here. And it just draws, puts lines in the sand and say, just don't go this far until you get this. Like, the Bible doesn't do that. The Bible just talks about when. The Bible doesn't divide up like sexual intimacy and say it's kind of like there's all of these places you can go at these different times. It just says, look, sexual intimacy within in a relationship is for marriage, period. Like it doesn't do what we want to do and say, well, how far is too far? It just says, look, intimacy within a relationship is for marriage. It's for marriage. That's what it does. From the beginning, in the garden, here's how God created our lives to go when it comes to marriage and sex. This is Jesus referring back to Genesis from the very beginning. He says, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. That this is God's design from the very beginning. And it was affirmed by guys like Paul, and here Jesus is affirming it himself. That first there is covenant. There's a leaving of father and mother, holding fast to a wife, and then consummation. The two become one. A covenant with one another, and a covenant with Jesus Christ, and then consummation. Now listen, we come from a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different places and understandings when it comes to what sex is all about. I grew up in the church in the 80s and 90s. I was a teenager in the 90s, and I don't know, maybe some of you can relate to this experience if you grew up around that time or at any time in the church. And here's what essentially we were told. We were just told sex is gross, so don't do it. That's what we were told, essentially. Like, just don't do it. It's not good. You could get STDs from it. It's just not good. Just don't do it. Just save it for someone that you marry, which is odd. But this is it. This is just what we were told. And don't talk about it, and don't ask questions. That's kind of where we left it. Then the other side of that is what our culture preached to us, and it continues to preach to us today, is that no, sex isn't gross. Sex is actually God. Sex is ultimate. Like, it's the ultimate experience. Like, you deserve it. Go after it. It's only human. Fulfill your desires. So that what do? We become like animals, and we will do anything and say anything to satisfy our sexual desires, even if that means looking at a random picture on a screen. And we have a culture right now that is filled with hurt and shame and regret and abuse and chaos and confusion. But the truth is that God is the one who has made us, and God made marriage. And sex is neither gross nor is it God, but it is a good gift from God. A good gift created by God for married people. Not I used to be married, not I want to be married, not married in your heart. That's not a thing. Sex is for married people, a man and a woman who are in covenant with one another in marriage. Sex isn't gross, sex isn't God. Sex is good. And sex is good when sex is put in the right place. It's like fire. Like, fire is good when it's confined in a fireplace. You can warm yourself up by the fire. You can cozy yourself. You can roast marshmallows on the fire. I mean, it's great. But when fire gets outside of where it's confined, it destroys. Listen, if this story were written, if this story had taken place 3,000 years later, 2024, what would have happened? What would have been the common thing to do? It would have been to move in together, right? You got to figure this out. You got to figure out, make sure you're compatible. You don't want to jump into anything too quickly. Just make sure that it all works out. You got to move in together, like hook up, shack up, and then break up. This is what we do in our culture, right? This is it. Hook up, shack up, break up. This is the story of our culture. Listen, did you know that those that move in together before marriage, they increase their chances of divorce by anywhere between 33 and 150%. Moving in together does not prepare you for marriage. Moving in together prepares you for divorce. God's way is still the best way. And when we leave God's way, we harm ourselves. God's law is not restriction, it's protection. There's covenant and then consummation. Listen, every relationship, especially a romantic relationship, will face a test of character. Will face a character test. And the testimony of your relationship will be defined by how you faced that test. For Boaz, he passes the test. I mean, I don't know if you read on here, it says, so she lay at his feet until the morning. She lay at his feet until the morning. I don't know if you know how this thing works, but nothing happened. It doesn't happen like laying at the feet, all right? So, Boaz passes the test here. As a result, here's what happens. Ruth knows that Boaz is a man that she can trust. Boaz is a man that she can enter into the covenant of marriage with, knowing that he will lead her to worship God and that he will lead her to trust God, that he will lead her to serve God, that they can do this together. Listen, if you're dating someone who is willing to have sex with you before marriage, you need to understand what is happening. You need to understand what they are saying to you. Because what they're saying to you, if they're willing to have sex before marriage, what they're saying to you is this, that you should know that I am willing to go outside of the marriage covenant to have sex. Now, they certainly aren't going to put that into words and just tell you that. But you should know, regardless of what they say, you should know that that is the testimony of their character. That I'm willing to go outside of marriage for sex. The marriage covenant means nothing to me. You should know that. But Boaz, he doesn't shortcut God's will for his life by trying to fulfill an immediate desire in an ungodly way. Instead, he protects Ruth. And how many times has he called Ruth daughter? That he sees Ruth as God's daughter, and he treats God's daughter in such a way that God would be pleased with how Boaz treats his daughter. So Boaz says, look, there's somebody else who has rights to be your redeemer before I do. And if he's willing, great. You've got to protect her. You've got to provide her. But if he's not willing, then as the Lord lives, I'm in. And you know what I love about this? Boaz doesn't say, yeah, there's another guy, and here's his name and address, go figure it out. He doesn't do that. He says, look, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it for you. I'll find out. So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. In other words, he not only protects her purity, but he protects her reputation. And he said, bring the garment that you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it. And he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. And then she went into the city. What was going on here, and what the point, what was behind this is that now Ruth has an excuse, has an answer for when she leaves the threshing floor. And if anybody were to see her, like if you were to see women leave the threshing floor, you had an idea what that was all about and what kind of woman that was. But if she leaves with some grain, then it was an answer, it was an explanation of why she was there. But not only that, it was, as we're going to see, it was a gesture made to her mother-in-law, Naomi. It says, then she went into the city, and when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, Naomi said, how did you fare, my daughter? Now, in the original language, language, the Hebrew language, this is not translated well, at least in my Bible, where it says, how did you fare, my daughter? Literally what she said here is, who are you, my daughter? That's what she said. Who are you, my daughter? Now, obviously, Naomi knows who she is. She calls her her daughter, but what Naomi wants to know is, hey, what's your status? Are you still the widow from Moab, or did something happen? Did he ask you to marry him? Are you going to be a wife? Did the plan work? And so how did you fare, my daughter? And then she told her all that the man had done for her. Now listen, just as a side, if you're single and you come home from a date and you're able to tell your mom everything that went on that date, that's a win, all right? Like that should be a good standard. Like, can I tell my mom everything that happened on this date? That's a good standard, all right? That's a win. That was no charge. That was free, all right? And then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, in other words, Boaz is not a man that takes, he's a man that just keeps giving. He's a generous man, saying, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. I love this. In other words, this is Boaz telling Ruth, going, look, Ruth, I understand what goes on here. Like, if I were to marry you, I understand what comes along with that. I understand the package deal here with your mother-in-law, Naomi. And I'm in. Like, I'm so serious about this that I'm willing to take that. I'm willing to go in. That's all right with me. And then she replied, this is Naomi. Naomi replies, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. What's she saying? She's saying, Ruth, I think he's motivated. Or as my parents' generation would say, that guy is hot to trot. He is going to figure this thing out, and he's going to do it in a hurry. Don't you worry. Throughout this story, we see a lot of hope put in a redeemer. I'm just looking for a redeemer, someone to bring protection, someone to bring provision for these two widows who have no protection and no way to provide for themselves. They need somebody from the outside to rescue them, and Boaz meets those qualifications. And chapter 3 begins with a plan, a sketchy plan for sure, but a plan that puts Ruth at the feet of Boaz with the hope that Boaz really is a worthy man who would respond with care and kindness. And Boaz not only promises to help, but he goes beyond what the law requires, and he lavishes grace upon Ruth. Man, this is a great story, but it points to a greater story. Because if you don't know, Boaz points to Jesus. That you and I are in need of rescue. We do not have what it takes to rescue ourselves from brokenness and sin. We need someone from the outside to redeem us, to rescue us, not only from the brokenness that we feel, but from the wrath of a good God that has come against us because of our sin. And Jesus is the rescuer. He qualifies as the rescuer, as the redeemer, who comes for us, who takes the wrath of God for our sin in our place by his own death. Listen, when you come to Jesus, though, there is no risk of being turned away. You don't have to wonder. The scripture tells us that if you come to Jesus, you call upon his name, he will save you. That whoever calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. And he will change your status from lost to found, from dead to alive, from enemy of God to adopted son, daughter of God. The question is, have you cast yourself to the feet of Jesus and asked him to make you his own? And if you do, he will. He will make you his own. And just a word for those in the room who have sinned sexually. I told you that growing up, we never heard much more than, hey, just don't have sex. Don't talk about it. Don't ask questions about it. Just don't have sex. You know what else I didn't hear? I didn't hear that there is grace for those who have failed. There is grace for those who have failed. Listen, if you are a follower of Jesus Christ, you have repented of your sin. Jesus is your king. He is your rescuer. You are not your own. You have been bought with a price. And now you are united to Christ. In every part of your life, your thoughts, your desires, your emotions, your physical being and life, all of it united to Christ, making you fit for heaven. That is all yours, and you're all his because of God's grace. And the grace that bought you, the grace that redeemed you, is the grace that you need to wage war with your desires. It's the grace that you have to say no to sexual immorality and say yes to the one that you are united to. And it's the grace that you have that offers forgiveness for your sin. Thank God for his grace.